So you know the directory structure for a servlet application, right? So in the web apps folder, I've created a folder called ServletConfig. S and C are both are capital letters. So inside this folder we are supposed to create some HTML programs here, but I didn't create any HTML program because I'm directly going to run my servlet from the browser without the need of sending a request from a HTML form. Directly I'll send a request through my URL pattern in the web.xml file. So you know the URL pattern in web.xml file, right? So inside webinf folder I have web.xml file here and classes folder, and this classes folder has a servlet class called demo servlet. So let me open this demo servlet class for you, and also let us go to web.xml file. Okay, this will not be visible. Let me open it in the notepad. Where is my directory, man? So this is our servlet config, and we have the web.xml file here. So let me open it with notepad. So look at this web app, the root tag that we are supposed to create in web.xml file. So you know about the servlet tag. Two tags I told you to create. So one is servlet tag, the other one is servlet mapping tag. So when we dealt with the servlet programs, in the servlet tag we have created two child tags called servlet name, that is servlet hyphen name and servlet hyphen class. And in servlet mapping we created two child tags. One is servlet name, the second one is URL pattern. So whatever URL pattern you're giving here with a forward slash followed by the servlet pattern name, so this servlet pattern you must give as a value of action attribute in HTML form. But because we don't use HTML form here, so to run this, what you need to do is, after servlet config directory is open from the Tomcat home page. So because we don't have HTML form directly here, what we need to do is we have to give that URL pattern here. Then this will send the request to that servlet. So what is our servlet? Demo servlet dot class, right? So that servlet is displaying a message. Driver name is com.mysql.jdbc.driver. So this is a driver name I want to use for MySQL database. So this one, what I have done is, instead of mentioning this driver name each time I make a change to this driver, what I have to do is I have to change my servlet program, right? If I am not specifying my let me come in a different way so that you'll understand. So look at the third tag that we have created under servlet tag. There is a tag called init-param. So this indicates initialization parameter. So a servlet will be initialized by calling init method. So during initialization you can pass some parameters to that servlet which will be used in your servlet program, and you need not create variables and store them in your program each time you want to know about these values. So you can obtain these values by storing them in a web.xml file, and you can read them by using some predefined methods that are provided in that servlet config interface. Okay, so I'll show you that servlet file, then you'll understand what are the methods that we can use to get these values. So what I'm doing, as you know, XML file is used to store data inside the tags. So in the init parameter tag, we have two tags that can be used, so you can use them multiple times if you have multiple parameters, you can use them multiple times. So what are the two tags? To specify the name of the parameter, you have a tag called param hyphen name, and to specify the value of the parameter, so these are called as initialization parameters. Okay, so you can pass them to a servlet, you can use them for a servlet initialization. So I'm passing one parameter here, I'm storing one parameter, init parameter. The parameter name is driver and parameter value is com.mysql.jdbc.driver. Okay, so in this way you can store as many parameters as you want to use in a servlet during its initialization. So in this example I'm creating only one initialization parameter. You can create as many as you want. If there are multiple initialization parameters, then you have to write these two tags multiple times. If there are 5 parameters, say for example, then you have to write these two tags 5 times, right? So param name, you have to specify the name of the parameter in between the opening and closing tag, and in between the param value opening and closing tag, you have to specify the value of the parameter. Okay, so in that way you have to specify for all the 5 parameters, but you should not change the order. So after you write param name, immediately it must be followed by a param value. You cannot write all the param name. If at all, if you are writing all the param name values continuously, then you have to use the in the same order param value attributes also, tags also, right? The same order you have to follow. You cannot change the order. Fine. So in whichever order you are specifying the parameter names, in the same order you have to specify the parameter values also, right? So here we don't have that confusion because there is only one initialization parameter. Okay, so there is something else called context param tag also that can be used in this web.xml file. Apart from this init param, you can also use another tag called context parameter. Okay, so what is the difference between init param and context param is init param can be used only within one servlet class, right? So say for example, you are creating two parameters here or one parameter here. If you want to access it in all the servlets of your application, then you have to mention these parameter name and values inside context param tag. If you want to limit these parameters to be available only for one servlet in your application, then you have to write it in init param. Okay, so this init param tag must be used where immediately after the servlet for which you want to use these parameters, you will be specifying that servlet name using servlet name tag and servlet class tag. So followed by that you must have this init param tag. Okay, so we'll see in the next JSP implicit object, that is context, right? Application context. So there we'll see about context param tag also. But today we'll see only init param. Init param will be storing some initialization parameters, names and their values, which can be used only in one servlet, not all the servlets of your application. So you know, when you create a servlet application, there will be many servlet classes, right? They'll not just be simply one servlet. There will be multiple servlet classes, right? So if you want them to be available in all the servlets, then you can use context param tag. If you want the parameters to be available only in one servlet, then you have to use init param tag, and that init param tag must be used inside this servlet tag for whichever class you want to make them available in that servlet class tag. In between that servlet tag only you have to use this init param tag. Okay, so now in my servlet, let me show you how to read these values. Okay, so look at this demo servlet.java file. So you know how to create a servlet, right? So you have to create a servlet class name and you have to make it public. So public class demo servlet extends HTTP servlet. So what type of servlet is this one? It is a HTTP servlet. Okay, so if it is a HTTP servlet class, which method you will be overriding? Either the doGet method or doPost method. So because I'm not using a HTML form there, directly I'm sending a request by using the URL pattern. So method attribute will not be mentioned there. So by default, this will be a get request. So I need to define do get method here. If I use a form and use method is equal to post, then I have to define do post method. So here I'm using do get method. So this do get method receives two objects, request object and response object. So we have the same objects as implicit objects in JSP, right? So request is of type HTTP servlet request and response is of type HTTP servlet response. And just before we have discussed about this throws keyword, servlet exception and IO exception. So what is the meaning of this? Do get method is capable of throwing two types of exception, servlet exception and IO exception, but this is not going to handle these exceptions, and that's the reason why we have not used try catch blocks here. Okay, so whose responsibility it is to handle this exception? Whichever method calls this method, that it is the responsibility of them to handle this exception. Okay, so in this method what I am doing is, set content type method is used to set the response type. We are setting it to text or HTML, and then I'm obtaining print writer object out by calling get writer method using response object. Then after that, so you observe there is an interface called ServletConfig interface defined in javax.servlet package. So you can obtain an object for this config ServletConfig object by calling get ServletConfig method. Get ServletConfig method. So how I am calling this get ServletConfig method directly without any object. So what do you understand from that? So this method is not part of any other class which is not there in our program, but it is part of HTTP servlet. Because we are extending HTTP servlet, automatically all the methods that are part of HTTP servlet class will also be part of our demo servlet class, and so you don't require any object to call those methods, right? So that's why I'm calling get ServletConfig method directly. So what is this method going to do? It is going to return an object of type ServletConfig interface. So now with this statement we have obtained a object called config, which is of type ServletConfig interface. Then using this config object and using the methods that are defined in this ServletConfig interface, I can call those methods, right? So you have two methods to retrieve parameters from web.xml file. Okay, so one is get init parameter method and the other one is get init parameter names. Just like get parameter and get parameter names methods are available in HTTP servlet request, so here also in ServletConfig you have two methods called get init parameter. This is the first one, get init parameter, and the other one is get init parameter names. Okay, so if you are having multiple parameters, to obtain their names you have to call get init parameter names method. If you are having only one parameter, you want to extract only one parameter, then you can call the get init parameter method and directly obtain that parameter's value by specifying the parameter name in the form of a string as parameter to this method. So just like get parameter method is used, we are using here get init parameter. But get parameter method, it is used to obtain the parameter values from the HTML form, whereas this get init parameter is used to obtain the parameter values from web.xml file. So in our web.xml file, just before we have seen, we have created one parameter. The name of the parameter is driver. The name of the parameter is driver, and the value of the parameter is com.mysql.jdbc.driver, which is a driver name for MySQL driver. Okay, so to obtain the value of that parameter using this config object, I am calling get init parameter of driver. So that will be returned and stored in the form of a string in driver object. Okay, so what is the return type of this get init parameter method? It is string. So that's why we have to create a string reference variable and assign the return value to that variable. So now what is driver going to contain? It is going to contain the parameter value, that is com.mysql.jdbc.driver. So using out.print, I'm displaying driver is concatenated with the value of driver variable. So what is there in driver variable? com.mysql.jdbc.driver. So after that I'm closing the stream, print writer stream, by calling close method. Okay. So what did you understand from this program? In your web.xml file, which is called as deployment descriptor, you can store some initialization parameters for the servlet. So what is this initialization parameter means? You can store some parameters and their values. These parameters and values can be used in your servlet program many times, number of times. Instead of accessing them each time you want, you can store them in web.xml file. If they are stored in your servlet program, what will happen is, if you make any change to that parameter name and value, each time you make a change to that Java file, you have to recompile the Java file and again run the application once again, right? So to avoid such thing, what we can do is we can store some values which we'll be using in our servlets in the web.xml file by creating either init param tag or context param tag. So if you are storing them using init param tag, these parameter and their values will be available only to one servlet. If you are storing those parameter names and values using context hyphen param tag, then they'll be available to all the servlets in your application. So that is the difference between context hyphen param tag and init hyphen param tag. So I hope you understood this concept, right? So now if you understood this concept, then we can go back to JSP implicit objects and deal that implicit object, which we'll be using directly in our JSP program to retrieve the values from this web.xml file. So we'll continue this class in the next class. So that is on Monday, I guess. Okay. So now if you have understood this one, then you'll understand that JSP implicit object related to this one. Okay. The object name is config. So we'll see JSP implicit object config in the next class. Fine. So